So my name is Daniel. Thank you for inviting me and for giving me an opportunity to talk about this very important issue. Thank you for the previous presentations. They've been a very good quality and a very good standing point for me to talk about what can young people do in this post-2015 framework and in SRHR. Like you've been told, I'm a current member of the Youth Coalition for Sexual and Reproductive Rights. I finished my studies as a medical studies, and now I'm doing my social service in public health research. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this, and if you guys have any questions, do let me know. So we've talked about SRHR, and one of the previous presentations, I found it very interesting because she was talking a lot about abbreviations, and it's very hard to keep up. So we have SRH, which is sexual and reproductive health, but we have SRR, SRHR, and SRHRR. And what does all of these mean? It's very confusing for everyone, even for young people. Some of us are a little bit familiar with those, but most young people do not know what these mean. So yeah, what's the importance in their life? What is the post-2015 framework and why youth should be involved? I'm gonna try and answer some of these questions, but the idea is to be a little bit provocative with you, to inspire you guys a little bit and to take action. And why is SRHR important? So the first acronyms, it's sexual and reproductive health, sexual and reproductive rights, sexual and reproductive health and rights, and sexual and reproductive health and reproductive rights. And the last one is very important, sexual and reproductive health and reproductive rights, because that's what's included in the SDG outcome document. So the proposed goals and targets have sexual and reproductive health and reproductive rights. What does this mean? That sexual rights are not included and are not touched. So that's very important for us. And sexual and reproductive health and rights are very important for us because it's not only about reproduction, about contraceptive methods, about having access to these services. It's about how we relate to each other and how we identify ourselves as human beings, as young people, and how we relate to each other. The post-2015, well, I think you have a very good idea of what that means, so I'm not going to go very deep into that, although I'm going to explain a little bit about the process. And why is youth important, and why should youth be involved? And that's a question that was asked in the panel from the first part of this conference. And it's because, first of all, it's a human right to participate. So we have the right to participate in the decision-making processes that ultimately affect our lives. So it's our lives that's being kind of decided upon, and we have a right to be there. And not because we're young people, we don't know what we're talking. So we do a lot come up with very good ideas, but sometimes we're used and kind of, yeah, they manipulate us sometimes because they want to bring us, like Johanna was saying, like a token person. So yeah, we're including young people. Here's a young person. But is that person really involved in the decision-making processes or in the formulation of health programs or in the implementation of those programs? Not really. And young people are facing a lot of barriers with their sexual and reproductive life. Even enjoying sexual life as the pleasure of enjoying sexual life, we're facing barriers there. So that's why it's really important for us to be involved in this process. So I'm going to talk about influencing the process, but it's hard for me a little bit to kind of disconnect with the importance. And there's a paradox here because I do work internationally, and I want to influence the process at the international level, and that's what we do at the Youth Coalition. But then there's this whole discourse and that I feel very close to about working at the grassroots level and what it does. Because I'm going to show you later a graphic that a lot of politicians and very high-level people think that's how this works. It's a top-down approach. But like you've said before in previous presentations, it's about bottom-up. How, like, you can make a lot of policies and a lot of provisions, but for example, in Colombia, we have decriminalized abortion under 3 circumstances. But then we go talk to the people, to women, and they don't know they have the right. First of all, 50% of women in Colombia don't know that they have access to contraceptives. They don't know that they can deny sexual intercourse if they don't want to, or if their partner has been unfaithful or unloyal. They don't know that they can refuse this. So we may have these provisions, but if we don't work with the people themselves, then it's useless. So in order to influence the process, you need to learn your stuff. Like they were saying in some of the previous presentations, it's not about only youth participating, it's about youth meaningfully participating. So that means young people need to know what they're talking about, and they need to understand this. Sometimes it's very difficult. But okay, so here are the sexual and reproductive rights. Sometimes we talk about them, but we really do not know what they are or what they mean. So there has been some mentions about reproductive rights in the ICPD conference in Cairo. There was a mention of reproductive rights. And sexual rights are not been, so they haven't been mentioned in a consensus in the United Nations. But it has been touched from, or it has been included partially with other topics like the right to life, the right to health, and what that means. So I'm going to show you just a little bit. You can find this at this Youth Activist Guide to Sexual and Reproductive Rights from my organization. It's published online, and you can find the website here if you want to check it out. What I want to show you with this is that reproductive health, this came out of the ICPD Program of Action. So reproductive health, therefore, implies that people are able to have a satisfying and safe sex life, and that they have the capability to reproduce and the freedom to decide if, when, and how often to do so. So you can see the interlinkages between the reproductive rights and the sexual rights. And also you can find some information about sexual rights, some documents. For example, if you go on the World Health Organization website, they talk about sexual health and how sexual rights are included in the right to health and why we should protect them and exercise them. Just a little bit overview about the post-2015. You all know about the MDGs. So before that, we have the ICPD, the Conference on Population Development in Cairo, and it kind of opened the door to talk about sexual and reproductive health, women empowerment, and some things about sexual rights. Then you know that the Rio Plus 20 summit in Rio de Janeiro, it was a follow-up of the Earth Summit, and it constituted, or it started this process called the Open Working Group, where several instances, one of them was the Open Working Group, which was talking about the goals and the indicators that we're going to use, but it was not the only space where this was being discussed. Also, there was the high-level panel of the high-level political forum and the high-level panel of eminent persons. So there's various spaces where the post-2015 development agenda is being worked on. So it's very, very complicated. Even for those who have been in New York or have been following the process, it's very, very complicated. So basically, there's different spaces where the post-2015 development agenda is being discussed. One of the most important ones was the Open Working Group, which has concluded and released a document, and I'm going to show you the proposed goals that they have. The Secretary General of the UN released a synthesis report, and now currently they're in the intergovernmental negotiations to really define what's going to happen, and we're going to know in the summit, the post-2015 summit in September. But there's still a lot of things that we can do, and it doesn't necessarily have to be in New York in the UN. So here are the proposed goals. There's 17 goals, like they've been you've mentioned before. It's very focused on sustainability, climate change, and production. There's only 3 goals that, basically, they're all interconnected. right? But the most important goals for SRHR movement, it's goal 3, 4, and 5, which talk about health, talk about education, and talk about gender equality. There's a lot of networks and platforms that you can work with in order to influence these processes, but this first part of my presentation is about knowing your stuff. So in order to influence, you need to learn what's going on. And it's very difficult, but there are very, very good tools out there that young organizations or organizations that work with youth have produced in order to make this more understandable and reachable. So these are the main 3 goals. To answer, I think it was your question this morning, I'm not gonna go very deep into that, but for example, goal 3 talks about healthy lives. Healthy lives. If we go back to the WHO definition of health as the state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not the absence of disease or infirmity, we can see, and if you go back to the slide where the WHO mentions sexual rights, then you can see how healthy lives kind of relates to having a meaningful sexual and reproductive life. It also talks about all ages. So we're not leaving anyone behind, supposedly. We're including adolescents, we're including young people, we're including children. And it also says for all. So hopefully this particular language is going to allow us to make demands and to demand our politicians, to demand our healthcare facilities that no one can be left behind. Like the LGBTIQ, there's a Q there that I just learned about a few months ago, and it's supposed to be queer, right? Those non-gender conforming that we also need to include and not leave behind. There's a funny story there, because when you were talking about gay, lesbian, and transgender people, a couple of years ago, I was at the World Health Assembly. So before the World Health Assembly, there was a executive board meeting, and they were talking about a resolution to strengthen the health services for the LGBT community. They spent almost an entire day discussing if they were going to discuss the topic, and they didn't reach any decisions. So the final decision is like, okay, we're going to postpone this topic for the next executive board meeting, but we're not giving it a name because we don't want LGBT there. We don't want the LGBT word. So they postponed a point of the agenda with no name whatsoever. And so the last executive board meeting in January this year, they tried to discuss it again, but again, no decision has been made. And that's the difficult part about diplomacy and working at the international level, because it's about making everyone happy. Only 2 minutes? Oh my gosh. So making everyone happy. So there are a lot of challenges, but we need to push those boundaries. I'm gonna go faster. So Renzo was talking about how all these issues are interconnected. And it's true, we sometimes talk among ourselves. So we talk about sexual and reproductive health and rights, but we're always talking about the people who are our allies. We don't need to convince them, we need to convince others and other sectors. So the Youth Coalitions released this policy briefs series, which talks about youth, sexual and reproductive rights, and poverty, and human rights, and HIV, and ICPD, and health, and early and child and forced marriage. So, and there are more topics that are interconnected with sexual and reproductive rights and young people. For example, climate change, it's a very good example. So trying to learn your stuff, so think, if you want to influence the process, think of something that you're passionate about, and then learn about that. How does that work? This is the figure that I was telling you about. So they think that new global development framework, and this is actually a part of a publication from the Pact. This is a platform that I'm gonna talk about a little bit later. They think everything is decided at the global level and then it reaches the local, and there's no way around it. But really, do we really want to live in a world where this is the way things work? Where people at the grassroots level, which are the majority, are not involved in decision making. Is that really what we want? It's only a few of us who get to come to these international conferences and who get to talk to others, but the majority of the people are not here. And we're not representative of those people. So we should really, really try to challenge this, because this is not working. And like Dr. Dasgupta said, do we really want to keep doing the same things, or we want to challenge the way we do things? And that's why young people are so important, because we're supposed to be fresh and new and bring new perspectives. But sometimes it's really, really heartbreaking when you see a young person just trying to do the same, and yeah. So let's just start working. There's a very good document that the Pact released. The Pact is a collaboration of 26 youth-led and youth-serving organizations that work to end the AIDS epidemic, or the HIV/AIDS movement. But it also works about sexual and reproductive health and rights. And they have this very great tool. It's called Advocacy Strategy Toolkit. This figure before, it's actually in that document, and I'm not proud of that. But anyway, so the first thing you need, this is like a roadmap. So you need to set your priorities. So what are you interested in? What makes you passionate? Then learn about it, map your network, build your timeline. So just be very strategic, pick your targets, make your case, choose the activities, develop the roadmap, and I think the most important part there is to communicate. And this is I'm not going to explain this thing, but it's about what's the issue that you want to tackle, and then questions, why? What are the root causes? And then what can you do? And then what's the specific part that you want to influence? Because if you say, I want sexual and reproductive rights for young people, that doesn't really say anything, and it doesn't give the people who make the decisions something clear to do. So if you want to make antiretroviral therapy free for young people, or is that something that you want? So you need to be very, very specific with what you want and who you want that decision to. Who do you want to make that decision? If that makes any sense, and in what time frame? So you need to be very specific in order to be able to influence. 2 minutes, and I'll be done. So you need to map your network. So you have your allies, you have passive allies, you have neutral people, passive opponents, and active opponents. Last year at the World Health Assembly was very interesting because it's about the exact moment, like a previous presentation was saying. So last year's World Health Assembly, they presented a progress report on adolescents' health. And the name of the resolution is actually Youth and Health Risks. So young people are risky, and we need to kind of do something because, yeah, they're risky. And the progress report was a page and a half. And to promote youth participation, the report said that the organization did not have the structure or the mechanisms to promote meaningful youth participations, which is kind of crazy. And so we started, there's a very interesting thing that the IFMSA does, the International Federation of Medical Student Associations. It's done it for 2 years now. It's the Pre-World Health Assembly. So it's a workshop for young people, led by young people before the World Health Assembly, to strategize, to communicate and share information, and to do real advocacy. So I had the privilege to lead a strategy to promote adolescent health. And fortunately, after approaching several governments who were our passive allies, they were on board, but they weren't saying, or they weren't outspoken, or they weren't very vocal with it. So we came up to them, we said, okay, this is the fact, we need to. So the research says that countries don't have information about adolescents. For example, I was doing a youth policy review in Colombia, how health policies affect the lives of young people, but then when I want to say something about young people, I have to mention between 15 and 49. So those are the ranges that the system of statistics in Colombia, they make. That's the information that they produce. How am I going to talk about adolescent health or young people's health if the range of information I have composes people from the 15 years to 49 years? That's completely crazy. So the World Adolescent Health Report actually doesn't have information at the country level because there is no information at all. So after all this, we talked to a lot of governments, we talked to WHO, and fortunately this year they passed a resolution on adolescent health, and that's a process that's starting. And hopefully young people and adolescents are going to be very involved. So I'm not going to go through this, but there's some priorities and there's a route to influence the process. There's a lot of networks. One of them is the Major Group for Children and Youth. I think I have it. I don't have it here. So if you Google Major Group for Children and Youth, there's Google Groups, and they share a lot of information, a lot of intelligence, and there's a specific group on young people, post-2015, and SRHR. So it's a very, very select group of people who strategize, who share information, what they're doing, what their advocacy priorities are. So once you define what you want, start creating your networks, and there's a lot that you can do at the national level. So if you start convincing your peers about the importance of this in your workplace, in your classroom, whatever. I do this all the time and I get in a lot of trouble at my work because when they say, oh, that's so gay, for example, then they're expecting me to rise. It's like, oh, now Daniel's going to say something. Because you need to work with the people who are beside you, because if not, then the politicians are not going to do anything. So you have a voice, you have social media, use it. Thank you very much. Oh, there's the information.